don't know if folks need to, should they come in now? Okay, I think perhaps they're having more fun outside. So, it was 8:35 in the morning on the 9th of June 2011, and I was sitting in a classroom in Alton High School and writing silently along with 19 other kindergarten through university teachers. We were all reflecting on an assigned piece of reading from the night before. Some of you may know Ralph Fletcher's timeless 1993 essay, Freezing to the Face. He's using a rock climbing metaphor to describe how we can become stuck and fearful, and he's using it to talk about writing. I was part of a 5-person leadership team co-directing a summer institute for the Pious Or Loves Writing Project. And here is what I wrote just over a year ago when I knew nothing about teacher performance assessment. I quote myself. The Ralph Fletcher piece, Freezing to the Face, stands out to me. He names and explores so well aspects of writing that are so important. Specifically, the process and significance and necessity of taking risks as a writer. I learn this lesson in every new activity I take on. I learn it most recently through my ballroom dancing, where I am specifically encouraged, no, directed to take risks. What I learned from this experience is that sometimes I need help to shift my patterns and to reach forward to move into a new space. I do the moving, yes, but the circumstances and impulse often come from outside. And I'm going to read that last sentence. What I learned from this experience is that sometimes I need help to shift my patterns and to reach forward to move into a new space. I do the moving, but the circumstance and impulse come from outside. And then my writing continued. I need outside others to free me. They do this with requirements and constraints. And I think what I'm going to be saying this morning is that I think TPA can be just such an outside impulse, a requirement and a constraint that can actually open up a new space for our SIUE elementary teacher education program, faculty and students to grow and learn and improve. Now, I also wrote another question. How are the requirements and constraints that free different from the requirements and constraints that imprison? And I think that's one that is very pertinent for us to think about. And I actually believe, first of all, one answer to that is that in order to free and not imprison, the requirements actually have to align with our deepest values and commitments. And interestingly, I can tell you I have no problem with the tasks and rubrics of TPA. I do believe that they follow my deep commitments and etc. And interestingly, we've had a number of faculty members since we've begun to work out and think about the teacher performance assessment who've been very uncomfortable with it. And they've actually transitioned, both of them. And one in particular took on the task of being a scorer very reluctantly. She just thought, something new is coming, I ought to do this, and it'll help my students, and she grumpily trotted off to the scoring. Actually, I think she went to a computer, that's where it was. And now she quotes herself and says she's a believer. So first of all, I think the teacher performance assessment I experience as a positive thing. The second response to freeing and not imprisoning, it's about how you approach the task. And at SIUE in the elementary program, we've been very intentional about how we've approached the task. And that includes growing and learning as we travel along with our candidates and our teachers and our community. And it certainly doesn't mean everything goes right. And you're going to hear lots about that this morning from me. You're all here this morning, and many of you are experts in teaching and learning, and some of you experts in researching that teaching and learning. Others of you, a substantial number, are just setting out on the journey of becoming the teachers you want to be. I know in the room we probably have some of the best teachers in Illinois who've gone on to become teacher educators, and I suspect that we have amongst the teacher candidates here people who will become among the best teachers in Illinois, and that's always exciting. Whatever your background, we all unite, I suspect, around some common histories. A common history of having experienced teaching in our lives that has transformed and changed us. We have felt passionate, attentive teaching from somebody who inspired us. And we all, that passion, whatever that is why we're here. That is why we're in the profession. And I think it really matters whether we teach in kindergarten or college that we remember and recall what we're about and why we're doing it. That's part of intentionally leading forward at this time of change. Because right now there are so many demands on us. Requirements and constraints can imprison. And my sense right now, I know I experience it, is certainly many of the teacher educators, many of the candidates who are working in our schools, are experiencing some kind of a feeling of being imprisoned. For the teacher educators, it's the Illinois Professional Teaching Standard redesign process, it's the program reapproval process, it's perhaps CAPE accreditation reports, it's Common Core standards coming into schools and overwhelming teachers. It's the new Danielson model of evaluation that teachers are feeling very uncertain and fearful of. And all these lead us to feel overwhelmed. And in addition, dropping from the sky is teacher performance assessment. Wham! And this is high stakes. The candidates in the room right now, whether or not they yet know what this is, they are going to escape. But by fall 2015, the only way to get a license in Illinois will be by achieving a passing score on this test. It is high stakes. And for teacher educators, those of us who've been doing it long enough are thinking, yeah, I know, there's going to be a number that comes out, a mean score. And oh yeah, that's going to be private to my institution, but I'm sure that's going to be leaking out, and that's going to be in the papers, and probably we're all going to be going around introducing each other by our mean candidate score. Hello, I'm a 2.8 out of 5, what are you? So you want to walk away, I know, from today's conference certainly feeling that you're more confident in navigating what is going to be happening in the next 2 or 3 years. And with perhaps some specific ideas for what you can do and learn from our experience, and what you don't want to repeat that we've been doing, and but also a sense that we're all in this together. The current teacher candidates will be cooperating teachers by that time. We all are a community, and we need to work together to make this something that frees us and doesn't imprison us. So I'm going to share this morning the story of the elementary education program at SIUE, how we approached last year, which was the field test year for TPA in Illinois, and how we navigated that journey, and we're continuing to navigate it. And it's going to be a story of successes and failures. And I'm going to really talk, what I'm going to say is going to be in 3 parts. First, it's going to be what is the TPA? And I'll give you a brief overview, because I know there are some people who are still saying, I don't seem to know anything about this. Then I'm going to talk actually about what happened last year, what we got up to, and some of the ways that we approached it, and what we've gone on to do this year. And I'll be unapologetic, I will use the word failure, and I will tell you about that in the 3rd part of my talk, about the approach we were using. Just a couple of things I want to clarify before I start. I was the elementary director, as my colleague Dr. Bushrow said, for 8 years. And I relinquished that responsibility last May. Unrelated to TPA, I promise you. It really was, but nonetheless, it means I'm in an interesting position. Last year I was the director of the program. And as we know, as a director, you have a certain amount of ability to set the agenda and decide sort of how things go. This year I'm a faculty member. I can influence and lead from within, but I don't have the power to actually do as much direction as I did last year. And I am not going to take on the task of the rights and wrongs of Pearson education and the implementation process in Illinois. I know Linda Tomlinson's going to be with us later, and I'm sure you can ask her all your questions. So for now, so I read from my journal. I told you about that sort of sense that I want us to work with throughout this talk of thinking about what frees and what imprisons, and how we can do this thing well, because it's so easy not to do it well. So what is teacher performance assessment? Well, it's a big deal. Last year, 7,000 teacher candidates across the country actually took part in it, across 21 states. And I know we're going to have a talk at lunchtime. You're going to hear from some folks who are much more central to the TPA process. And I just want a quick show of hands. Who participated in the field test last year? Raise your hand if you in some way participated. Okay, so these people who've got, leave your hands up in the air. So you need to have a look around you, because these are the people who learned really valuable lessons last year. These are the people you want to talk to at lunch. I'm telling one story from the microphone. They've all got stories too, and they know a lot about stuff that we didn't find out about. And I wish I'd been talking to them too. The second thing is, raise your hand if you would say you're very familiar with the TPA tasks and rubrics, even if you haven't actually done it. Raise your hand if you say, oh, I'm pretty familiar with them. Okay, so that's what I thought. Really a relatively small group of you actually have any idea what I'm talking about. So, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time giving you the quickest overview, and I do know at lunchtime you're going to get a clearer sense of it. So this is just you dipping in at the beginning. The teacher performance assessment really is nothing startling. It's a very obvious look at teaching from the point of view of planning, instruction and assessment. And you can see this very nifty little diagram that the TPA folks at Stanford have produced. And they're calling it I'm going to quote from the website edtpa.aacte.org. It's a pre-service assessment, a pre-service process designed by educators to answer the essential question, is a new teacher ready for the job? And it includes a review of a teacher candidate's authentic teaching materials. So no longer will somebody just tell me they can plan, instruct, and assess, but we have to be looking at materials. And they go on to say, evidence of a teacher candidate's ability to teach is drawn from subject-specific learning segments, usually 3 lessons from a unit of instruction. So it's an in-depth, 3 lessons taught to 1 class of students. The materials assessed as part of EdTPA include video clips of instruction. That's the big gasp. Lesson plans, student work samples, analysis of student learning, and reflective commentary. There's nothing that's particularly surprising in that. What it sort of looks like physically, if you actually get a look at the handbooks, there's a specific tasks, like the planning task, with a series of very, very particular prompts. And then, yes, there really are 5 rubrics that you're examined on that are scored for your planning. For the instruction, this is along with the video clip and the writing, 5 more rubrics. And I'm using this year's EdTPA, it changed a little bit from last year. So there are 5 more rubrics that look carefully at how you did that teaching on the video clip. And a lot of it focuses on students learning together actively, using their own little voices, not doing what I'm doing. I think I'd be an automatic 1 or a 0 on the TPA, standing behind a microphone talking at people. And then Oh, yeah, another 5 rubrics on assessment. So very detailed, very specific. And of course, candidates write an analytical commentary. So this turns out to be a written report of about 20 pages. It's an extensive piece of writing. Now, as we're thinking about this, I just want to check in with you. It's worth noting that this is high stakes. This is performance assessment. High stakes means at SIUE we have a 2-year undergraduate program. The candidates that come in next year as juniors, 2013, will also escape, skipping through the fields, not having done TPA. But the candidates that come in 2014, in our 2-year program, they will be doing the TPA. So we have one more cohort to come in brand new to actually get this thing up and running and working well. Now, let me ask you, performance assessment. We talk about it, etc. How many of you actually have experience of performance assessment? Now, I have a rather unusual hobby that I do in my life that's actually put me very much in touch with performance assessment. And you heard me reference it in that little snippet from my journal. I have enjoyed becoming part of the same-sex ballroom dance community with my wife, Sonia. And 2 weeks ago, we travelled to the United Kingdom and we competed over the weekend in a ballroom dance competition. And no, I'm not in that picture. You didn't think I was actually going to show you a picture of me dancing. But what I want to show you, if you can see it, is really the character at the side. This really is a judge with a clipboard. There were only 5 around the floor when we were doing this 2 weeks ago, but often there are 9. Now, I learn a lot about performance assessment because they are right there staring, and it is high stakes. And I want you just to think for a minute, when was the last time you had an experience where you were involved in performance assessment, where what you did mattered? And let me just help you think about it in a high stakes context. So just think about it for a few minutes. When were you last involved in performance assessment? Because my point is, it really matters that we begin to recognize our candidates are going to feel very differently in our programs than they have felt before. And actually managing this process matters not just so they pass TPA, but so their experience of it is not an experience of high anxiety. And that's, of course, what we're seeing a little bit in schools at the moment, as the Danielson model has begun to be talked about. So, question to ponder. In general, from thinking about, this is the sort of what is TPA thinking, how well is your current program positioned to integrate a major video assignment and a written-based performance assessment? Is that going to be an easy transition, a couple of tweaks, or is that very different from how you're running things right now? Secondly, are you going to use TPA and its language as the central organizing theme throughout your program? Some people are saying yes, they will. Well, if you intend to do that, how are you actually going to do that? That's a big shift. And then lastly, how are you right now beginning to plan to include all the community members in this? Faculty who teach general education classes, field supervisors, cooperating teachers. How are we going to get everybody to understand what this experience of high-stakes performance assessment and actually the detail of it is going to be like? So, if I go on to the second part, what actually happened to us last year? Now, the last question I asked about planning to include everybody, some of you will really begin to recognize that's actually a leadership question. It's not really only planning, it's leading. And I think we need to start framing this as leading. And 3 weeks ago, some of you may have attended the IATE, I hope we can use those initials in this meeting, am I allowed to mention it? Anyway,
we're all friends.
Okay, the meeting, and there was a representative there from the TPA, Ray Pashone, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, yeah, thank you. And he said something that absolutely struck me as very important. I'm going to repeat it again. Leadership. It's leadership around implementation that makes the difference. And that's what we need to think about. And so let me tell you a little bit then about SIUE, just to get, so you can kind of scale your own experience with ours. At any one time, we have about 200 undergrad elementary candidates. The numbers fluctuating a little bit, that's another conversation. But the year of this field test last year, there were 107 elementary ed seniors. That means we had between 3 and 4 sections of each course. That's tricky when you're introducing new stuff. We have about 7 full-time clinical supervisors, and they each work with a group of 25 candidates throughout 2 years. That means we have some folks who have very strong influencing relationships with candidates. Other faculty, like myself, who may step in and out. I'm part of that group of 5 to 7 tenure track faculty and subject specialists. But as my colleague, Dr. Bushrow, illustrates, she works in several programs. She's not only working in Lisle, she's also working with a secondary MAT program. So they're not dedicated. And then for us, in our area, a huge piece of context is field experience placements, 50 schools and 15 districts. Tremendous variation. You can't go and talk to one person and even dream that everybody's going to know about it. So how did we manage this process? We accidentally fell into this. We have a TPA leadership team in elementary education because we had, the year before, we'd set up a different leadership team to manage our SIUE's senior assignment, which is a very high-profile thing that all our seniors do, an inquiry project. And we'd just rewritten this senior inquiry project. We didn't know about TPA. We'd just done this new, exciting senior experience. So as a result, we had a team of people, very experienced faculty and pedagogy experts. One of our members even had experience of working with a performance assessment in California. And we were across subject areas on the committee, literacy, math, science. And 2 of the folks on the committee were the full-time field supervisors, so we had a really good mix of input. And then 2 of us were tenure track, Ralph and myself. Oh, sorry. So what I want to tell you about now is that I think in characterizing what we did last year, you know, I do think very highly and still drawn that classic work of Lakoff and Johnson, who for 30 years ago were telling us metaphors matter. Metaphors we live by, images that can help us understand the nature of what we're doing can be very powerful. And so here is my metaphor for what it was like in that leadership process last year in the field test with TPA. Swinging around on a little cable car in the wind, not knowing where we were going. We felt, you know how, I don't know, when you were a kid, did anybody still use those tin cans and string and you'd sort of listen for messages? It felt like we didn't know what the TPA, we didn't know what it was, and yet we were sort of asking our candidates to do it. That's a dancing act in and of itself. The manuals were just coming out, permission letters to video, that's still causing us nightmares. And we were this little group of 4 faculty who were swinging around doing this. And as some of you might be able to see, there are some teeny-weeny people down there in the grass. And they were the rest of the faculty. I think they had no idea what we were doing. And occasionally we'd knock on the window and say, "Hey, look, we're doing this really important thing." And they go, "Oh yes, oh yes." And, so what sort of things did we actually do? We felt that this isolated team that we were, some of it was obvious. We met an enormous amount and talked together as a team. And that was, in fact, one of the most satisfying professional experiences all 4 of us have had. We became a professional learning community. You know that thing your administrators always dream of you being part of? Well, we generated it, and it continues to be a very professionally satisfying experience, which is a good job, because it's a lot of work, okay. we decided we already had monthly seminars, senior seminars that we'd invented for the previous project, that senior project. We decided that one place would be the place where we did all our TPA direction from. And I think this is something for you to consider whether or not you use that model or another model. But we went for that model. And our main purpose was not to tell the candidates how to do TPA. We didn't spend much time with the booklets. We recognized that we couldn't do that. We didn't even have the information and knowledge ourselves. And so what we did is we emphasized general good inquiry things. How do you make changes in what you're doing? How do you study your learning and grow from it? And we felt very good about that emphasis on inquiry. And we, in fact, at one point asked our candidates to draw little Venn diagrams of the relationship between them learning and doing an inquiry and where TPA fell. And we were very pleased that for many of them, TPA was a small piece in this larger experience of inquiry. A few of them did it the other way around, TPA and little inquiry. But for most of them, some of them also managed to blend the two experiences. And so essentially, we just set them loose and said, oh, by the way, here are these handbooks, get this done. It was a little bit nicer than that, but that was the essence of the message. We recognized that we needed help with technology. This was a big concern for us. Now you have to remember that we made a decision that we would have all 107 candidates do this. So we thought to ourselves in our little committee meeting, oh boy, will they all have cameras? Can they do it? If we don't provide them with any equipment, and that was actually one of the things that we thought, well, you know what, we'll find out. And that was very much our attitude, that we'd learn by experiencing what happened. So we did ask for 15 volunteers to become technology pilots. They were the keenies, the one who kind of thinks it's cool and they're already busy making little videos themselves. And they went ahead and did a pre-taping of themselves so that they could understand what the issues were with using the cameras and the sound quality, etc. Because sound quality matters more than the pictures. And we didn't know that at the time. And so these 15 folks became experts, and then we seeded them into the other groups so that every candidate could have somebody they could talk to about the practical task, and that worked very well. Now, another invention that I think also worked extremely well, we invented 2 3-day TPA submission windows. They never knew Pearson didn't have those. We did that because we felt we had to have some control of when candidates were doing what, so that if they had questions, we could be available at the right times and we know what they were doing. So a 3-day submission window, you had to talk to your cooperating teacher and you had to choose when you were going to do your TPA. And we gave them 3 days in March or 3 days in April. And so in negotiation with their teacher, they then took those 3 days off school. And that was a way we could manage that process too, because we were, can we do this? Oh, I guess we can, okay. Take 3 days off school. So we needed to know when those 3 days were happening. And those 3 days were for the candidates to do the writing. They should have done the video. We guided them with a timeline to do the video, but they actually did the bulk of their work on those 3 days, and then we said they had to submit it. Technically they didn't, but we just wanted to help them get it done and off in terms of responsibility. And then in May, we met with a focus group, 25 of our strongest candidates, and we asked them, what do you need most help with TPA? So just turn to the person next to you and tell them what you think they said they needed most help with. And when they'd done it, this was when they'd done the whole thing and submitted it. Any ideas? Just chat to somebody next to you. What do you think they actually need?
Do you think, obviously time, but maybe some sort of advice on the upswing on how to get clear on all the things? I mean,
yeah, that's possible.
Some kind of structure that that they could choose from or something?
I think that would definitely help. I feel like rubrics, if you have rubrics ahead of time,
Yeah.